Generally, a web penetration test is conducted as a black box test. It means that you're only going to have an IP range or a URL, and then you will display the application in your browser, and then start the test. So at that point, you don't have the code and any of the other resources of the application. So it's not even possible to view and analyze the code in a situation like that. And let's say even if it is possible, a person won't be able to have a comprehensive information on the application's code because web developers can build an application over several different languages, frameworks, and databases. Core technologies. So it is rare to have knowledge about all the technologies that the application is built on, okay? So that's why I said before, while conducting a web penetration test, we will need to understand the basic web technologies, but we don't need to be masters in them. But it is why, in the next few minutes, we are going to cover some of these technologies. Web browsers. The web browser, or simply browser, is software, right? Takes you anywhere on the internet. It's great. It's better than a limo. I love it because, of course, you're watching this course right now in a browser. Now, they request web pages over HTTP and display them into a human-readable content, we'll call it. So despite the fact that they're used every day, a lot of people don't really care to understand how they work. I mean, it's kind of like driving a car. For the most part, everybody gets in a car and turns a key and boom, off they go. Nobody thinks about the engine or what's happening in it or any of the other systems because they don't have to. It makes sense for regular users. However, what if you're a mechanic? All right, so it's pretty much the same for us. As a web penetration tester, we need to know more about browsers because they are the first point that we touch in a web application. In fact, I believe they're like a battlefield. I mean, stick with me here. We've got privacy, interface, security, all kinds of other options that are very important while using a browser. But in this video, I'm just going to show you how they work and how to use them in a penetration test, right? So anyway, web browsers, they come in many different flavors, and they're designed to run on different operating systems. Now, you've probably heard of the most popular web browsers. We've got Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, Microsoft Edge, or Explorer, Opera. And then in addition to these big players, many others exist. Maxthon and Vivaldi, Brave, Torch, Epic. And they all have different features with their pros and cons. So for me, I've been using Firefox from the very first day that I started pen testing. And I'm still using it today. I like working with Firefox. It has a simple interface that you can control almost anything from. And also it has many useful add-ons, and I'm going to use them while I conduct a penetration test. Now, when you install an add-on, generally you will get an icon on the toolbar like I have here, or you can go to an add-ons list. And in this window, you can manage your add-ons. But for you, you can choose any of the known browsers that you want to for this course. You probably already have. But now let's come to the main question. How does a web browser actually work? All right, so I'm going to tell you briefly. Basically, a browser uses a protocol, such as HTTP, to retrieve data from a network. The browser can point this data from the URL, which is the address of a specific page or any other asset. And to be viewed by a web browser, this data should be presented in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now right-click on the page. Click View Page Source. And here's the source of the page. Of course, this is not the actual code of the developer. We'll get to that topic a little later. But for now, pretty much you can think of what you're looking at on the screen as a translation of the code of the developer. So let's have a look at it. It consists of HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Now, another super feature is Web Developer Tools. Now, pretty much all known browsers have this feature. I don't want to go out on a limb and say every single one. It's mostly developer-oriented, as the name would suggest. So we're going to use this as well, especially when we're viewing the HTTP messages and dealing with document object models. So anyway, I don't want to make an advertisement for Firefox, but my point is that all browsers have a long story. I won't tell you or go into the browser history or what's also called the browser wars. You can figure that out for yourself. You probably already have a favorite browser. But obviously, these days, the browser market is still developing, and I think it will continue to develop, at least for my lifetime anyway. Point of that story is features are constantly being added. So, of course, you can visit the website called The Evolution of the Web so that you can view these improvements. Unfortunately, it's not updated as frequently as perhaps you might want, but at least it'll give you a pretty good idea as to how these improvements all came to be. It also shows the evolution of the web browsers. But also, I just wanted to have a look at the page at the moment. So if you do want to have a look at browsers more carefully, the general design of the browser is explained in these documents. It's very good. Well, it's long, but it's a pretty well explained document. So let's scroll down. And I want to talk about this image a little bit more. So let's analyze this figure a little bit. The user interface, this includes the address bar, the back forward button, bookmarking menu, all this, and every part of the browser display except the window where you see the requested page, the browser engine, marshals actions between the UI and the rendering engine. The rendering engine is responsible for displaying the requested content. For example, if the requested content is HTML, the rendering engine parses HTML and CSS, and it'll display the parsed content on the screen. And different browsers use different rendering engines. For example, Firefox uses Gecko. Now, for networking. For network calls, such as HTTP requests, using different implementations for different platforms behind a platform-independent interface. JavaScript interpreter, that's used to parse and execute JavaScript code. And guess what? Each browser has its own JavaScript interpreter. For example, Firefox uses SpiderMonkey. What about the UI backend? Used for drawing basic widgets like combo boxes and windows. Data storage? This is a persistent layer. So the browser may need to save all sorts of data locally, for instance, cookies. And browsers also support storage mechanisms such as local storage, IndexedDB, WebSQL, and file system. We're going to get into some of the local storage attacks later in some of the other sections. But okay, so it's important to choose the right browser for you while we test. Due to the different rendering engines, each browser can sometimes treat HTML, CSS, and JS codes in different ways, so that's why it's important to figure that out. This can affect, obviously, accomplishing some of the web attacks. So at this point, I want to emphasize that it's always good to know which web browser is, well, the most widely used in whatever the target user's environment is. I remember several times that some of my customers use much older browser versions due to some compatibility reasons. So that means that if I test this application with a newer web browser, I might get different results, right? I won't be able to accomplish some of the attacks that I wanted to purvey.